I think kind of that like systematic approach to solving problems. Like I love logic puzzles. If I could be like a full-time engineering student and just get paid off my GPA, that'd be like the dream job because I could just solve problems all day.
Welcome to the Next Level Income Show, where it's our goal to take your income, your investments, and your life to the next level. I'm your host, Chris Larson. If you haven't yet, get a copy of our book for free at our website, nextlevelincome.com. That's www.nextlevelincome.com. Just click on the book link, and I'll even send you a copy if you put your address in. On today's show, we have Nick Leja. Nick is a serial entrepreneur, and he's an author. He currently owns businesses in 6 different industries with more than 60 locations across the country, generating annual revenue in excess of $50 million per year. While Nick is an engineer by training like myself, he's written a fantastic book, first in a series of books that he's writing, and he talks about communication. Today, Nick joins us to talk about his first book. Nick, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, man. I'm so excited. This is the first time I spoke to you since you became a father.
I know. It's been a crazy 3.5 weeks, so I've learned a lot. So it's been fun so far. Definitely some challenges overall. It's been a pretty fun ride.
Yeah, dude. Well, you're just getting started. You're like on the roller coaster as it's beginning to tick up, and all the fun comes later. My older son, he'll be 13 here, and
nice.
I just took him on my favorite mountain bike ride here in the mountains near Asheville the other day for the first time. I've been waiting years to do that. So
awesome.
Yeah,
Did you like it?
Oh, dude, it was great. It was great. So yeah, you got a lot of fun in front of you. This is the hardest part of being a parent, what you're doing right now, in my opinion. So
okay. Thanks for
but
that.
hey, congratulations. And let's share a little bit about your background here with the audience before we dive into your current book, your new book, and all the things that you're doing here in business.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I guess to get started, I got my electrical engineering degree at Kettering University in Flint. And then I graduated at the end of 2008. So right when the Great Recession was getting started.
Oh, that's rough, man.
I know, great time. I was one of the few of my few peers who actually had a job offer at the time. And I put in my notice the day after I graduated. And because I wanted to be an entrepreneur. That's always been a really big thing. My dad gave me the book Rich Dad Poor Dad when I was a kid, and kind of talked about the cash flow quadrant. And I'm like, I want to get to the I quadrant. I want to be the investor. So I always knew that I wanted to be an entrepreneur, and I became a franchise consultant. So as a franchise consultant, I represented different franchises, and I worked with people who wanted to open their own business and kind of align them with the one that met their business goals and lifestyle goals and financial goals. So through that, I met John Chesney. He's the founder of Disc Replay, which is like a brick and mortar video game store. So we buy and sell video games, movies, and electronics. And I'm a pretty intense game nerd myself, so that was right up my alley. And during the Great Recession, it was a great business because people needed to sell stuff to get cash to pay their bills, and then they also wanted really cheap entertainment. So we actually, knock on wood, did really well through the recession, and I just loved it. I loved owning my own business, so I never looked back. So I opened up Plato's Closet. That was the next franchise I got into, which is just like Disc Replay, but we buy and sell clothes and accessories for teens and young adults. And I love that brand a lot. And I kept opening up more units. And then I met a business partner in Illinois named Chad, and he owned a couple of European wax centers. So that was my next brand that I got into. European Wax Center, we're a brick and mortar store. We do body waxing services like Brazilians, eyebrow waxes, things like that. That was pretty fun. And then we came across My Salon Suite. So we build suites and we rent them to stylists and estheticians. And my latest one is Superior Fence and Rail. So we install residential fences. So my first non-brick and mortar venture that we're going into. So we opened our Chicagoland location last August, and it's off to a pretty good start.
Amazing. We have engineering background. We got some engineers that listen. For me, people are like, well, why'd you get an engineering degree, Chris? Like you didn't use it. You went into sales. And, I always thought that the process that you go through as an engineer, and really the thought process, right? Like, how do you solve a problem? You make assumptions, you solve the problem, you see what the result is, you iterate, and then you do it again. Sometimes you change your assumptions. And I think to me, that's where like this huge amount of value came out of my education. And it's interesting because you look and you see, like, even what happened like during the pandemic, people make wrong assumptions, and then they try to solve it, and they get this result. It's like, well, why is my result wrong? I'm doing all the right things. And they don't really understand, that maybe maybe they had the wrong assumptions in the first place, or they're not used to correcting themselves and going back through.
Or the landscape has changed and
Yeah,
there's
and
new
you
assumptions
gotta,
that need to be made.
yeah, and you gotta go back and do that. Um, I guess tell us how you've used that process in your education, Nick, to be successful in business, because you've clearly, gone through, had to use different assumptions in different businesses, different processes. What do you think has helped from your engineering background to make you successful in business?
I think kind of that like systematic approach to solving problems. Like I love logic puzzles.
Yeah.
If I could be like a full-time engineering student and just get paid off my GPA, that'd be like the dream job because I could just solve problems all day. So I love solving problems.
Yeah.
I love learning new things. And I love solving problems forward and backwards. So like at every single test I would take, I would
Mm,
solve the forward. So if it says, here's, X and Y, solve for Z, I would solve for
yeah.
Z. And then I would redo the problem starting with Z and Y and solve for X. So I'd always solve it forward and back. So I apply
And
that a lot to,
was that as a check? Was that as a check to make sure
yeah.
it was done properly? Yeah.
Yeah, it was a check
Yeah.
to make sure it was done properly. But also, like I learned just to kind of look at the inverse. Like a lot of people, I mean, myself included, oh, how do I be successful, or how do I solve this business problem?
Yeah.
But they don't typically ask the question, well, how do I fail? And so I like to ask that question also when I'm
Mm,
doing this. Like, what does it look like? What does failure look like? And what are the things that I shouldn't do? So, like for example, in a business,
yeah.
a lot of people, when they say what's the most important thing in business, the customers. For me, I'm like, okay, well, then how can I fail at this business? And it's if I have a team that doesn't treat the customers properly. So I was like, as a business owner, I kind of view it, my biggest my biggest focus should be the team. Like, yes, at the end of the day, customer service and the customer experience is like the end all be all for businesses, for like a
Yeah.
business, but I'm a business owner, not a business. So for me as the business owner, I need to be taking care of my team, kind of treating them like the customers and creating that. So kind of looking, every time I look at a situation, I kind of play it out, forward and play it out. So that's one
Yeah.
thing. But also just I guess just the love of problem solving. So sometimes when I feel people get into a problem and they get into a it's frustrating and it's
Yeah.
aggravating, which then you get into like a negative mood and you kind of walk away or whatever. But for me, it's kind of like, oh, I did A and B and I expected C. That didn't happen. Why didn't it happen? And then I kind of get curious about it. And then when I finally learn why is, oh, I forgot about variable D. That's like exciting and motivating and for me because I feel like I expanded my worldview. So I guess whenever I
Yeah.
run into problems, instead of it's like, darn, this sucks. It's okay. What am I not aware of? And it's kind of like a little treasure hunt to solve the Rubik, I guess.
Yeah, I think I love it. I mean, I think the same way, right? Everything's kind of an equation. There's variables involved, and you look at all those. Some things are constant, but some things are changing. And that's one of the reasons I love sales. I got to work with surgeons most of my career, doctors. I was in the OR, and you could have everything figured out, but there's people involved, and you have to interact with those personalities and make sure you're being sensitive to that. And you're doing the same thing. You just mentioned like your employees, right? So you have these businesses. A lot of people are like, wait a minute, you're an engineer, Nick. You solve problems. What's been the hardest piece? Has it been working with the people? Has it been doing that? What have you found to be the most challenging or the most enjoyable when it comes to the people side of the business?
I think the biggest thing I struggled with was I used to like if we imagine that we have a bus and I'm like, okay, I want to get the
Yeah.
bus from point A to point B. So I'm going to go
Yeah.
recruit a bunch of people to get on the bus and help me get the bus from point A to point B.
Yeah.
But deciding to get the point from A to B was my decision. And I come up with all the policies and procedures. I try to get people on board. I try to do
Yeah.
rah-rah motivational meetings, kind of get them to follow it. And it's just like constantly things wouldn't happen properly. So I'd do like checklists to check the checklist and then employee
Mm,
supervisors check those. And it was just challenging. I've kind of learned now it's better instead of saying, okay, I've got a bus that I want to go from point A to point B. It's like a bus. I want to get awesome, motivated people on the bus. And then together as a team, decide where do we want to go? Do we want to go to point B or maybe we should go to point C? Maybe I think
yeah.
we should go to point B, but my team, who collectively is more intelligent than I am, decides C's the place to go. And I found that when doing it with a more collaborative effort like that, they get a lot more
Yeah.
buy-in. And like I can big, like us missing puzzle pieces. I used to then focus so much on the how, like the methods, like, okay, these are the open procedures, these are the closing procedures, talking more so of like, retail business.
Yeah.
And again, that's just challenging to it's just challenging to push forward. It's like a constant grind. But and this is just like the past couple of years, I've really realized the power of incentives. Instead of doing all that, it's like, okay, well, let's take a percentage of the gross profits we put into a pool, and all the supervisors share on that. Now, how do we maximize gross profit? So now it's not me coming up with open close procedures, then begging and pleading for you guys to do them, but it's like,
Yeah.
what do you guys think the open procedures should be? Should we even
Love
have
that.
them? Should we do this? So I think it's getting the right people on the team, and then collaboratively deciding where to go. And then the most important thing is getting the incentives right. Like incentives drive
right,
results. It's one of like the iron rules of nature. Like Charles Munger's comments on that in a lot of his speeches and writings.
yeah.
But like the incentives are just absolutely key. Because if you get the people with the right incentives, now your job is not managing them. It's just standing out of their way and not getting in their way, and then supporting them in every way you can, which is a lot more enjoyable, and it's a lot less of the tedious work.
That's a great point. Coming from a sales background, whenever management, be on these advisory committees and they say, well, hey, you guys, you salespeople are doing this. We want you to do this, and say, well, you're not paying us to do that. Like, well, that's the right thing to do. It's like, well, then you should align compensation. You should align incentives, as you're saying, Nick, with the right thing to do with those things. And we're human beings. A lot of times, we're complex, but when we make our decisions, we're pretty simple. It's like, hey, is this gonna reward us, right? I'm
100%.
hungry. Yeah, I'm hungry. Am I gonna get food? I'm thirsty. I'm drinking water, right? It's like I'm at my job. I want to perform well. How do I know I perform well? I get paid to do
Yep.
my job, right? And if you're not paying me to do something, well, I should be doing something else probably. And then it's very confusing, even if it's not a conscious level. I think that point just can't be underscored enough.
Right. And one thing you just mentioned there about aligning incentives, like another aha moment I had a year or two ago, is that I used to have like my supervisors had one incentive plan, then the managers had a slightly different one, and the district managers had a slightly different one. Then,
Yeah.
I with the profits. So now I've just made it so the supervisors have an incentive plan, the managers get a percentage of the supervisor's bonus, the DMs get a percentage of all of their managers' bonuses. So now truly is rowing in the same direction. And it's so simple. It's not this complicated spreadsheet with a bunch of variables. It's like, okay, if I make my supervisors make more money, I'm going to make more money. And just like the own now that my managers have taken at all the stores over the business. I mean, like the last couple of years, we've had record-breaking years. And it was, I can almost narrow it down to like the month when I switched our incentives to when it was simple, not complicated, not like 10 different variables going in together. And then everybody else's, up the food chain, so to say, is like, it's all just a percentage of the people that report. And it's just been great.
I love that. I read a book when I was in business school by, and I'm forgetting the name of the book, but the gentleman that wrote it owned the biggest Cadillac dealership in the country. And shocker, it was in Texas, right? Biggest car dealership. Actually, I think it was the biggest car dealership in the world. Biggest Cadillac dealership, biggest car dealership. And he wrote this book, and people said, "Well, how did you do it?" And he said, "Well, everybody's paid on commission." And it's not exactly that, but it's what you just said, Nick. The salespeople were paid a percentage of sales. Their managers were paid a percentage of sales. Those washing the car were paid. The mechanics and the service side of the business. So they all knew, hey, Nick's coming in. He's bringing his Cadillac in. And if we treat him right, he's probably going to come back and he's going to get his car serviced here. He's going to buy a new Cadillac here. He's going to refer his friends here. And he said it's very simple when you align everybody and incentivize them in the right way. And you mentioned getting everybody on the bus, but I really love we were conversing here before the show, and this is the second time this has come up today in podcast. But earlier today, I was talking with a good friend, Vic Raya, who was on the podcast here just a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking about the British rowing team, and he said they went from last to first in 4 years between Olympics by asking one simple question. It was like, how can we row this boat faster? Now, I love what you said, Nick. You said there are 3 buckets of team members. You got your rowers, your watchers, and your sinkers. Tell us about kind of that revelation that you came to when you said, okay, who do I focus on? How do I get this boat to go faster? Is it the rowers, the watchers, or the sinkers?
So when I started off managing, I was under the mindset a lot of people have told me, it's like, okay, you've got your A, B, and C employees. So like, the A employees are your rowers. They're the ones who are moving the ship forward. Your B employees are your watchers. They're not really moving you forward, but they're not really pulling you back. They're just there. And then there's the C employees or the sinkers who are actively kind of sinking the ship back, creating toxicity and yada, yada, yada.
Yeah.
So my initial mindset was, okay, well, the rower know what they're doing, so I don't need to handhold them, so I can lead them be. And the watchers, I'll get to them in a little bit, but more importantly, I need to work on the sinkers. So all my time went to the sinkers or the seamers and trying to like get them up to become rowers and watchers. And that's just like it's really hard to motivate somebody who's not self-motivated. It's like it's like filling up with the hole in the bottom. Like you have to constantly keep filling it with motivation. So now I've kind of switched it. I spend all of my time with the rowers, and I give them the most time and attention, not managing them, not telling them what they need to do, but really asking them ideas. Hey, how can we like you just said, how can we move the ship faster? Like that is a good conversation to my time with and has a lot of utility versus someone who's not rowing and it's just like, is or sinking, is actively trying to like poke holes in the ship and say, hey, stop doing that. That's just like a waste of time. I'm
Yeah.
solving a problem that shouldn't be there.
Right.
So anyway, I spend all my time with the rowers. If I have any time left, I spend it with the watchers. And then if I have any time after that, I'm probably not doing my job properly. Then I would work, with the sinkers. And kind of just like a quick clarifying thing. Like I know sinkers kind of has like a potential negative connotation, and I'm not trying to imply that people are sinkers, but it might just be there's just a role mismatch. So perhaps I don't like dealing with customers, but I'm working the front desk at a retail job. So they might be a sinker at their retail job. It's not they're a sinker of a human being, but it's just in that job. Me personally, I am not good at sales. I hate sales. So I would be a sinker if I was on a sales team because it's not me. I don't like, especially cold calling. It's just not my set. So I would be a sinker on that team, but I feel like one of the fastest rowers on another team. So,
Yeah.
and another thing
that's a great point.
Yeah. And with the sinkers, so it's again, it's not that they're bad people or or they have low work ethic, but it's just they're not a good fit either with the culture or the job, or there's something that's not clicking. So first I look inward as to myself, their manager, and okay, do they have the tools they need? Do they have the training they need? Have I communicated expectations clearly? Like I always look inward first. Am I doing something that's causing them to not stay on this team? But once I've checked all those boxes, they're still not there. Now I'm like, okay, I'm not happy with them on the team. They're not happy with them on the team. So like every day I let this go by is like a day that I'm robbing from finding a different team that they're actually happy at, that they could excel at. So if I keep them on too long, I'm kind of being selfish. I'm really just kind of avoiding the confrontation just to kind of comfortable with myself, but I'm really taking away time from them to find, what they're after. So I know it's a mouthful, but that's kind of how I've shifted a little bit with how I focus on my team.
Well, it's amazing, and I think it's a terrific segue because what you're talking about is empathy, right? You have this empathy towards people, and it's that I think to me in a leadership role, that's the biggest challenge. You have to look and say, wait a minute, not everybody's like me. I can't. It's not a problem to be solved necessarily.
Right.
It is, but it's not a simple equation. You have to say, wait a minute, maybe I have to change the assumptions. Maybe I have to change up the things that are happening here. And I think that's a fantastic point. When it comes to working with teams, aside from aligning incentives and figuring out where to spend your time, but it's also are the right people in the right seats, right? To go back to that analogy. But next, I feel like this has been wonderful so far, but we're having you on to talk about your book here, The Dark Fairy, Nick. And thank you for sending me a copy. I remember when you were telling me during our first conversation, we got introduced, that you're writing a book, and I was really excited to read it. And then when you told me what it was about, I'm like, wait a minute, you're kind of confusing me because you're an engineer and you wrote this what appears to be like a fictional story called The Dark Fairy, but it's a fictional nonfiction story. So tell the audience a little bit about what The Dark Fairy is about.
Yeah, so the Dark Fairy, it's a short story and it's a fictional tale about a fairy in Iris. And I don't want to get any plot spoilers here, but basically there's a problem in their village and she has to solve the problem. And it's a book on listening, so it's very heavy. It teaches the reader how to listen, the importance of listening, and why we should listen. I feel like in schools we're always taught, oh, you have two ears and one mouth for a reason, but we don't get too detailed beyond that. We're told that we should listen more, but like we're not really explained how to listen. So like, is listening just being quiet and like physically hearing the sound waves come from one's voice? Like, no, it's a lot more than that. And it's very challenging to do. It sounds easy, but there's so many times in conversations when I'll hear somebody ask a question A, and then the other person responds by answering question B, and then like nobody's really kind of satisfied with that thing, and a lot of people don't even notice it. So I feel being able to listen and learning how to listen, and I'm not going to say I've mastered it because again it's challenging, but I've gotten pretty proficient at it. A lot of my success has been attributed to that because like can genuinely truly listen to people and then like have them feel understood. You can solve root problems versus proximate problems, and then you establish such an intense level of trust. There are so many people that I talk to on a daily basis, and I can just tell they're not listening to me. They're waiting for me to stop talking so then they can interject their opinion or whatever, and it's just very frustrating. So anyways, this is my first book. I'm writing a series of books, sort of these short stories that are fictional in nature, but they have a non-fictional message. And I was just thinking, what's like the most important skill in my toolbox that I feel has led to my success, both personally, financially, whatever your definition of it is. And listening is by far the number one skill that I feel is most important.
Yeah. And coming from a sales background and also being a problem solver, I have to work on this constantly. And if I ran and grabbed my wife here, she'd probably vouch for that. She'd say, "Yeah, Chris, you need to listen, do a better job listening." But it's so important. It's so important to the success in any relationship. You know, referring to my marriage here, but also um, when we when we talk about, like, as we're talking about kind of in a business sense. Um, so first off, if you're listening today, I read Nick's book in less than an hour. It's a very enjoyable read. I like the story, but then what surprised me, and I thought this was fantastic, Nick, you finish the story and then you actually have like tips, like a how-to guide in the back. And this is what I think is fantastic, because you read the story and you're like, okay, this makes a lot of sense, but then you actually give examples. You almost have a playbook in the back, Nick, about how to improve your listening skills, and it's all very concise.
Yeah, a big reason why I like doing the story aspect, because I feel like we remember stories better than facts. And I read all the time, and most of what I read is nonfiction. A lot of them are like 300-400 page tomes, just full of fact after fact after fact after fact. And like my favorite part of reading those books is sometimes they'll tell a little bit of a story as an analogy, and that vividness, it sticks with us. And I like that. So the story aspect is kind of to help it stay top of mind, but then like the little how-to playbook at the end. And I try to be as concise as possible. I probably edited that like 20 times, removing every unnecessary word just to like cut to the chase. But that kind of goes more in depth of all the different thoughts that I have on the topic. But I think the story is what helps keep it to mind. So it's kind of like, oh, okay, yep. I kind of feel like, Caden is the name of the dark. It's like, okay, I kind of feel like the dark fairy right now, like I'm not being heard. So can I just get this off my chest and just have you listen for a second? And I've done this like with my team now, and that kind of like language to use. It really helps communicate more efficiently and more effectively. And just gives people like words to use, because people might feel like they're not being heard, really being listened, and they'll feel like a discomfort, but they don't really know how to articulate that. And then during a fluid conversation, it just passes them by, and they don't really know how to act. But so that was part of the reason why I wanted to give like the story aspect of it, to kind of help people communicate with one another, assuming they both read it.
Yeah, and you have some terrific things in there, just kind of like mirroring people's language to make sure that you not only understand them, but also give them a chance to clarify. And I think you mentioned talking about how those moments really allow you to understand what's happening, kind of behind the scenes, because we may hear one thing, we hear it through our lens. And the other thing that really stood out to me, that I stopped and just kind of digested it for a moment, and also reflected a little bit on my own kind of actions, was, and I think this is great. You say, respond to emotion with emotion, respond to logic with logic. Can you expand on that just a little bit?
This was another kind of aha moment that I had. So, being an engineering background, loving problem solving, I usually default to logic. So like someone, an employee would come to me and they'd be venting and, oh, this is this. I'm like, okay, so we're going to do A, do B, then we're going to do C, then we're going to do D. And I could just see on their face, it's kind of like they weren't like really satisfied with that. Like they couldn't argue with my logic. My logic was sound, and they knew deep down it probably would solve the problem, but they just seemed like kind of unsettled. I knew that they were unsettled, but didn't really know why. So with responding, if someone's being emotional, like if I'm emotionally venting to you, before we get to the problem solving endpoint, it's really important that you acknowledge my emotions simply by repeating or rephrasing what I just told you back to me and labeling my emotions. So Nick, it sounds like you're, trying to think of a quick example off the top of my head, but so Nick, so it sounds like you're really frustrated because caught up in a traffic jam, which now you're going to get home, you don't have time to eat, or you don't have time to make dinner and eat, which is going to rob you some time with your kid. And then you want to watch a movie. It just feels like you're just overwhelmed, and every day just like your grind, and it just makes you want to pull your hair out. Is that accurate? Is that kind of what you just said? And then to me, it's like, yes, exactly. Like that's how I feel. Or I'd be like, no, it's not just that. It's really like, it's ever since I got this promotion at work, I've just been like just so busy, which is, so I don't get to leave the office now until 6:30 and yada yada yada. It's like, oh, so it sounds like really it's more of you're feeling overworked by this job promotion that you just got, which is then causing you to spend less time with your family. Is that kind of more of the root of it? It's like, yes, exactly. That's it. So by acknowledging the emotions and kind of trying to understand them, it helps, one, make sure that you understand what I'm saying, but two, it also makes sure that I even understand what I'm saying, because sometimes when I'm saying things, I think I'm identifying the root problem, but when somebody repeats it back to me and I hear those words back, I'm like, well, no, I guess that's not exactly right. This, so it kind of helps me clarify my own thoughts. And then once we get to that point, once we come to that understanding, then I would start getting logical. Like once I feel like I've been heard, yeah, so I mean, do you have any advice on what I should do? Or like, I mean, I don't know if I should ask my job or my boss for my old job back or whatever. So now once I'm logical, it's like, okay, well, let's talk about the different options. We could do
Yeah.
A, or we could do B, we could do C. Let's talk about the pros and cons, however you do it. But if you shortcut that emotional response, it's kind of like a settling thing, and it's like we're solving the problem too quickly. And to me, I'm like, okay, Chris, you're solving a problem, but I'm not even sure that you even understand 100% what the problem is. I don't even know that I even understand 100% what the problem is. So it's like, so yeah, I guess we're solving it, but like, I'm not sure we're solving the real issue. So that's kind of by emotion with emotion, logic with logic.
Yeah, and I think it's fantastic, right? Because if you're solving the wrong problem, you might do all the steps right. Kind of going back to the beginning, we were talking about being an engineer, and the answer might be correct, but your assumptions were wrong.
Yeah.
And you can keep going and keep going. It's like, well, great, I'm good at solving problems, but I'm actually not getting anywhere. And what I like is, there's a lot of times you're frustrated or you don't understand how somebody's thinking. You're like, that doesn't make any sense to me. Like, I don't know, pick like politics, right? But politics are a very emotional thing. We all see things through the lenses of our experiences. And, my father died when I was young. That's gonna color, my experience as a child being on Social Security and different aspects, whereas somebody else is going to have a different experience. There's a lot of emotion tied up with that. And what may be logical doesn't necessarily have any effect on my feelings and that sort of thing. So I like that formula that you provide, which is like, oh, okay, I'm hearing emotion and respond with emotion. And then you give even those examples of how I can communicate.
Yep.
So
yeah, well, thank you. I'm glad
fantastic.
that resonated with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and then you dropped on me that you got another book coming out. So let us know if you want to give a little sneak peek here to the audience. We'll tell everybody where to get your current book, but you want to tell the audience what your next book is going to be about and when that's going to drop?
Yeah, so my next book, it's called Journey to Enya, and the main character is a mouse this time instead of a fairy, a mouse named Martin, and it's about his daughter has an illness, and the only way to cure her is to get a herb that is at an island called Enya, which is pretty far away. So he has to rent a ship and hire a crew and to basically make it to Enya. And there's a lot of challenges between where he's starting and the island of Enya. And basically, you and I just now about rowers, watchers, sinkers. That's the premise of the book. It's how to manage people. So Martin in this book, he's a weaver by trade. He's an introvert. He's never managed people before. He's just kind of been an artisan, and now he has to manage a team of 21 mice and other mammals to get to the island. So, and with this book, I pulled a lot of my personal experiences. So like in the beginning of it, it's when I first started as a manager, all the mistakes that I made. And again, by showing versus telling, I'm showing how Martin does the things that I did when I started off and how it worked out, which is not very good. And then kind of basically the same learning I had is the learning curve that Martin goes through. So, and I've given this to a lot of test readers so far. And so far, the feedback's been really positive. People said that the different characters or employees that Martin deals with and the different conversations they've had, they're like, I've had those exact same conversations with people, and I've handled it the way that Martin did. And I thought I was doing the right thing, but then it blew up in my face, just like it blew up in his face. So it seems like it's really resonated a lot with people, especially those who have been in managerial positions. So, yeah. And that one I'm shooting to drop that one at the beginning of April. So I'm just doing the final edits now and getting the cover art done.
Yeah, well, if get that information over here. Okay, this should be out just a couple weeks after we air this podcast here, which should be a really good timing for you here, Nick. I'm looking forward to reading it as well.
Thank you.
And I think it's fantastic. You have an interesting background with your engineering. You have the real world application of being a business owner. And one of the big things we love to do here on the Next Level Income Show is to share with people shortcuts and ways that they can be more successful, whether it's making money, keeping money, investing money. And I think your books do a terrific job doing that. And we'd love to have you back on and discuss some of your future books as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I'd love to. This has been a fun experience.
Yeah, man. So what's the best way to get a copy of The Dark Fairy for the audience?
It's on Amazon, so you can go to Amazon, just search The Dark Fairy. You can also go to my website, which is just nickleja.com, and it's listed on my website with a link to Amazon. So those would be the two best ways to get it.
Awesome. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see Nick's link to Nick's website below. If you're listening here on podcast, then you can check the show notes and you can link to that as well. Nick, thanks again for being here today.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Chris. I appreciate it.
Hey, Chris here again. I hope you found this episode valuable. Now, I have one more thing to gift you. We have a page for my coaching clients where you can get a free copy of my book, as well as much more from previous guests on the show. Just check out nextlevelincome.com/coaching to get a free copy of my book, audiobook, and much more. I'll send you a copy of my book and cover all the shipping costs as a thank you for listening to the podcast. Also, please like, share, and take just 90 seconds to give us a rating on Apple Podcasts.